Good afternoon. This is a reading of the book review by Mr. Ling Chua, and the title of the book review is A Timely Book for Trump, China Rising, Capitalist Roads, Socialist Destinations. The review begins. America is no longer a superpower, and every American election produces presidents with no idea where the problems lie. The reality is that the estimated cost of overdue maintenance across America's aging infrastructure system by 2020 is $3.6 trillion. Its NASA scientists and astronauts are mostly in their 50s and 60s. On top of that, it is so cash poor that it has to rely on its enemy, Russia, a country still under U.S. sanctions, to transport its oldest 56-year-old woman astronaut to the International Space Station. Yet the newly elected President Trump gave priority to the idea of asking Congress to pay for his election promise to build an $8 billion wall along the Mexican border. America's economy is built on speculative activities. The main cause of the 2008 great financial crash were labeled by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco as, quote, speculative bubbles and overreaction to technological innovation, end of quote. However, all the presidential candidates, particularly Trump, blamed China for the disarray of the U.S. economy. Despite the fact that an U.S. CBC report found, quote, trade with China supports roughly 2.6 million U.S. jobs across many industries and created $216 billion in growth in 2015, end of quote. American GDP is funded through ongoing, relentless money printing and borrowing, with the amount of national debt more than doubled since the 2008 great financial crash. Despite such a reality, Trump is not asking basic common sense questions. Number one, how did China, a nation invaded, semi-colonized, and exploited by a dozen world powers before 1949 for over a century, with a bankrupt economy, 80% illiteracy rate, an average life expectancy of 36 years, and a hungry population, 1/4 of the world population at the time, rebuild itself from scrap after 1949 and become the biggest U.S. creditor within just 6 decades of nation rebuilding, while the U.S. national debt is ballooning to $20 trillion. Question number 2. How, when the Chinese GDP is still more than $7 trillion smaller than the U.S.'s, could it generate the world's largest national currency reserve and contribute to 33.2% of the world economic growth in 2016? Question number 3. How China could replace America as the world's biggest trading nation starting in 2013 when its economy was and still is so much smaller than the U.S.'s? Question number 4. What's wrong with the supposedly bigger U.S. economy? Is it a structural problem? Or an ideological problem? Or is it a problem with bad governance? Question number 5. At a time when America is running trade deficits with 101 countries, is it helpful for all the presidential candidates in Congress to habitually blame China for U.S. problems? Will a 45% tariff imposed on China really help Trump's America? Continuing on. American power and influence across the world are diminishing at a rate Trump fails to fully comprehend, and so throughout his presidential campaign, he thought he could continue to bully the world to make America great again. Trump thinks that he can build thousands of miles of wall along the Mexican border and ask Mexico to pay for it. He thinks he can impose 45% tariffs on all Chinese imports without retaliation from China, while causing inflation, recession, unemployment, and severe damage to the reserve status of the U.S. currency. He thinks he can order his allies from Europe to Asia to pay much more for military bases in their respective countries. Obviously, the American election system fails to produce congressmen and presidents with the ability to learn from reality to find creative solutions. Can America be great again with a political system that lacks self-initiated internal criticism and internal reform? Is Trump aware of, number one, why in America's backyard was the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, abbreviated CLAC, formed in 2011 with 33 member states while excluding participation of the United States and Canada? Number two, why the more than a decade of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq cost U.S. taxpayers $5 trillion, and according to a report by the Watson Institute, there are over 6,800 U.S. troops and then approximately 7,000 contractors who have died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that the number of veteran disability claims is over 970,000. But the main benefiters of such American military adventurism turn out to be Iran and China, nations that have secured friendship and enhanced trade ties with America's perceived enemies without firing a single shot. Continuing on, the fundamental question for Trump is, why does American democracy fail so miserably in producing leadership with knowledge, ideas, and skills for common sense reasoning? Why is China rising so unstoppable? And why the U.S.'s decline will speed up if America continues to pursue policy that views China as a threat instead of learning from China for self-improvement? In retrospect, Trump should notice that for every historical American aggressive policy towards China, China becomes stronger and America weaker. Just a few examples. Number one, when the U.S., Europe, and the former USSR imposed financial, commercial, and technological sanctions against China in the 1950s, the then leader, Chairman Mao Zedong, initiated a policy of self-reliance and a secret 100-year modernization program that has contributed to China's success to this day. Number two, when America banned China from cooperating with NASA and any international space forum, China successfully engineered its own space program and may become the only country with a space station when the U.S.-dominated International Space Station sets to retire by 2024. However, China's space program is open to cooperation with all nations, including America. When the U.S. Congress this is point number three. When the U.S. Congress refused China's desire for more say in the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, China successfully launched its own Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB, with the endorsement of the world, despite severe U.S. pressure on allies not to join. Under these circumstances, China continues to welcome U.S. participation, quote, anytime, end of quote. Number four, while the U.S. continues its irresponsible money printing and borrowing policy, one that threatens China's massive investment in U.S. Treasury notes, China began a program of currency swaps across the globe and lifted the status of the renminbi as the world's second largest trading currency without even the need to freely float its national money. Number five, when America announced its policy to deploy 60% of its Navy forces to the South China Sea by 2030 in the name of the pivot to Asia, China responded with speeding up its One Road, One Belt program to connect the world through land and ports in the Indian Ocean, and as usual, China has opened its arms for the U.S. and the world to participate in the program. Number six, in 2011, under the endorsement of the U.S., the Philippines renamed the South China Sea as the West Philippine Sea, using its newly delivered 1970s American second-hand warship to chase away Chinese fishermen from these waters. China responded with a massive sea reclamation project and successfully expanded the size of 7 islands in the South China Sea, equipped with airports, hospitals, schools, lighthouses, research centers, water desalination plants, ports, tourism, and missile defense systems, while offering emergency services and support for all vessels passing through these waters. This while the U.S. engaged in hundreds of military exercises in the region and moving its 2 aircraft carriers in and out of the South China Sea, burning money with zero achievement. The questions that Trump should ask himself are, 1. Why does America have to view the rest of the world's countries as a threat? Instead, China responds to hostility with creative strategies for new institutions, new infrastructures, new economic strategies, and a call for mutual respect and cooperation, what China's President Xi Jinping calls, quote, win-win, end of quote. Number 2, why is the Chinese leadership so effective and creative in its ability to overcome difficulties without the need to fire a shot? Number 3, why is Chinese leadership able to identify problems and execute policies with speed and win-win results? Continuing on. At a time when there are so many articles and books calling America a, quote, failed state, end of quote, the world has increasingly recognized the merits of the Chinese political model. For example, the former Singapore Deputy Prime Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam is impressed by government accountability in China. Australian electronic retail chain billionaire Jerry Harvey thinks that the solution to Australia's political chaos is a dictatorship of the people like China. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau expresses admiration for China's basic dictatorship of the people, and the late Australian MP Malcolm Fraser praises China's stability and sense of purpose. Despite increasing world recognition of the Chinese political model as superior to the current Western model, it seems that most Westerners still regard the Chinese model as totalitarian. China's Marxist-Leninist dictatorship of the people has and continues to engage in decades of nonstop self-generated internal self-criticism and internal reform, criticism that percolates from the villages and urban streets to the very top of the government administration. This is why the Communist Party of China, the CPC, continues to enjoy an 80% plus approval rating by its citizens, according to the U.S.-based Pew Research Center's annual Global Attitude Survey, while America's leadership is consistently scoring around 30% or below in the same survey. It is noteworthy that the Chinese government calls itself a consultative democracy, with the CPC as the ruling party and societies and politics participants serving the role of providing advice, feedback, monitoring, and suggestions. Have any Western journalists or authors bothered to learn the Chinese language and engage in in-depth understanding of how the Chinese political model works before criticizing it in an indoctrinated manner as some kind of totalitarian monster? It is time for the American politicians, especially President Trump, to have an in-depth look into the Chinese political model, how it is structured, and how it functions. He also needs to make an in-depth review of past American policies, their consequences to the world, so that America can identify the sources of its continual decline and hence formulate the right policies to make the United States great again. It is not time for political ideological indoctrination, since civilizations can learn from each other's merits to become stronger. For Donald Trump and all of his citizens, the e-book China Rising, Capitalist Road, Socialist Destinations by Jeff J. Brown an American with multilingual skills, fluent in Chinese, Arabic, and French, and 13 years experience living and working in China is the perfect place to start. The book does a great job of extensive documentation about what America has done and is continuing to do to get into its current predicaments. Conversely, Mr. Brown provides the same research to showcase China's story, past, present, and probable future, and how the Chinese admire and adopt other civilizations' achievements and are willing to learn from others for ongoing self-improvement. Brown believes that the Chinese political model is a new form of democracy where the leadership is hyper-mindful of public opinion and its citizens' well-being. The enormous amount of documentation provided in China Rising will be a refreshing eye-opener to all American policymakers, including Trump, who wishes to make America great again. End of book review. About the author. Ling Chua is an Australian author of a series of books on the issue of media disinformation and how it is hurting the world and humanity. He is also the author of Democracy, What the West Can Learn from China. His contact is wchua62@gmail.com, and his Twitter feed is Outcast Journalist, OCAST Journalist, JOURNALIST. Thank you.